You've been taught that self-improvement is about willpower, that the key is grinding harder, pushing more, stacking habits, reciting affirmations, and visualizing success until it magically appears. That with enough repetition and focus, you can force the universe into compliance. But here's the twist. None of that operates at the level where real transformation happens. You're not failing because you lack discipline. You're not stuck because you're not motivated enough. And you're definitely not missing success because you haven't repeated your goals 55 times under a full moon. The reason most self-improvement doesn't work is brutally simple. It's built on a Newtonian model of change. Linear, mechanistic, cause and effect. Push here, get that result over there. That's the old story. But your identity, your potential, your evolution doesn't live in that story. It lives somewhere far more powerful and far more precise, inside a quantum system where change doesn't happen by effort alone. It happens through resonance. Here, everything is frequency. Everything is probability. Everything is encoded in fields, not formulas. And your ability to align with new outcomes isn't about striving, it's about tuning. You're not becoming something new. You're shifting into what already exists in a deeper layer of the quantum field. This isn't about wishful thinking or pop spirituality. This is about understanding how reality works when you stop treating it like a machine and start interacting with it like a field of dynamic probabilities. In this episode, we are going to explore the most mind-bending secret behind true self-improvement, using the lens of quantum coherence, identity states, and nonlinear transformation. We'll expose why your thoughts aren't the real point of leverage, and why the field you broadcast determines the timeline you land in. We'll decode why repetition often keeps you stuck, and how precision creates collapse points that shift your trajectory entirely. This isn't just another motivational pep talk. This is a technical map for aligning with the highest version of you using principles pulled from quantum theory, systems thinking, and energetic architecture. Expect to have your beliefs about change dismantled. Expect to see how outdated the try harder paradigm really is. And most importantly, expect to see how reality has been trying to evolve you all along, if only you knew how to align with the right signal. This isn't about hoping things change. This is about learning how to become the broadcast that shifts timelines. So if you're done waiting, done forcing, and ready to explore the real structure of transformation, you're in the right place. Let's begin. Who you believe you are is not a constant. It's not a permanent self. It's not even a stable structure. It's a pattern, a fluctuating signal, a probabilistic interference field of memory, emotion, choice, and perception. When you think of yourself, your habits, your behaviors, your tendencies, you're not accessing a fixed personality. You're accessing a localized frequency field. That field is fluid, mutable, structured by information, yes, but not bound by it. At the quantum level, identity is not a thing. It's an event. It's an ongoing resolution of variables, collapsing moment to moment based on the state of your internal system. The you that shows up in your career. The you that makes decisions in relationships. The you that reacts to uncertainty. These are not consistent across time. They are dependent on resonance. Resonance with specific beliefs. Resonance with specific emotional set points. Resonance with specific timeline attractors that your consciousness stabilizes through repetition. In other words, you don't have an identity, you generate one. Every thought you entertain, every emotion you amplify, every micro-choice you normalize, these create reinforcement waves that stabilize one version of you out of an infinite probability space. But here's the shocker. The identity you're used to calling me is not the most aligned version of yourself. It's just the most familiar signal. You've practiced it. You've rehearsed it. You've emotionally and neurologically entrained yourself to it until the signal became strong enough to seem like truth. But it's just a dominant resonance pattern, which means it can be modified, not by force but by signal change. Now let's break that down further. In quantum mechanics, a system doesn't exist in one definite state until it's observed. Prior to observation, it's in superposition, a spread of all potential outcomes. The same applies to identity. Who you are is not fixed. You exist in a superposition of multiple versions, each aligned to different potential timelines, different capacities, different expressions. And what determines which version becomes real? Your conscious and unconscious resonance. Your internal state, emotional, cognitive, energetic, collapses the wave function into one version of you at a time. In other words, you aren't attracting outcomes. You are resolving them. You're resolving one of many possible yous into this moment. And by stabilizing a different resonance, you can resolve a different one. This is where traditional self-help completely misfires. It assumes you have to build a new self from scratch, stack it like blocks, construct it over time. But that's not how reality works at the quantum level. You don't need to create a better version of you. You need to tune to it. It's already there, in the field, waiting for resolution. Let's go even deeper. Your thoughts, they're signals. Your emotions, they're modulations of that signal. Your attention, it's the targeting system. Where you place sustained awareness determines which identity version you energize. If you keep running internal loops of fear, doubt, guilt, scarcity, you're not being punished. You're resolving the version of you that corresponds to those signals. But change the inputs. Shift the emotional field. Elevate the signal quality. And the identity state begins to shift. Not because you forced it, but because the field only ever mirrors what you resonate with. Let's talk about entanglement. In quantum systems, particles that become entangled remain correlated regardless of distance. If you alter one, the other responds instantly. Your identity works the same way. You're entangled with multiple potential selves. When you shift your signal, you're not trying to catch up to a better version of you. You're altering the field in a way that the entangled version of your higher self becomes accessible now. This is not woo. This is mechanics. And once you see identity this way, everything changes. You stop working on yourself as if you're broken. You stop obsessing over habits like they're salvation. You stop treating transformation like it takes years. Because now you understand. The version of you that is clear, powerful, integrated, abundant, that version is not far away. It's simply a different resonance set. So how do you access it? You begin by becoming radically aware of the signal you're currently broadcasting. Not the thoughts you say out loud. Not the affirmations you paste on your mirror. But the actual frequency, your baseline state, that governs your emotional field, attention patterns, and nervous system. This signal is always broadcasting. And it's always resolving one version of you over all others. When you learn to stabilize a higher frequency pattern, not just think it, but live it, you shift the dominant resolution point. That's the true mechanics of self-evolution. Now that we've explored how identity is not a static self, but a quantum event determined by resonance, the next step is to examine a popular trap. One that keeps millions stuck in place despite their best intentions. Next, we will reveal the hidden mechanism that explains why trying harder actually reinforces the wrong timeline, and how to break the loop. You've been taught that effort is the answer. Push more, work longer, add more discipline, hustle harder, break through resistance like a battering ram. And yet, that brute force strategy only seems to reinforce one painful outcome. You stay the same. Not because you're doing something wrong, but because you're working against the actual structure of how change unfolds within the quantum architecture of reality. Trying harder traps you in a feedback loop, a closed circuit, a probability pattern that can't collapse into something new, because you keep energizing the old state with more attention, more intensity, more focus. Let's unpack this. In classical physics, change is linear. Apply a force, get an equal and opposite reaction. That's Newton. That's mechanics. That's the world of moving objects and friction and gravity. But in the quantum domain, that model fails. Here, we aren't dealing with objects, we're dealing with fields, frequencies, and probability clouds. And these fields don't respond to pressure in the way matter does. They respond to resonant information. They respond to signal quality. They respond to coherence. So when you try to work harder on yourself in the old way, repeating mantras, grinding out new routines, micromanaging every emotion, you're not creating forward motion. You're generating more friction in the same energetic pattern. That's not transformation. That's reinforcement. This is called inertia in probability space. Here's what that means. Every belief system, every identity state, every version of you that you've habituated over time exists as a stabilized configuration of probabilities. That configuration becomes your default field. It shapes how you think, what you notice, how you act, how people respond to you. Now, when you apply force from within that field, using the same assumptions, the same emotional energy, the same mental framework, you're not creating new outcomes. You're energizing the current timeline further. You are entrenching it. Trying harder within a limited identity field only confirms and extends the field. It's like being in a room with one-way mirrors and punching the wall to find the door. All you're doing is bruising your perception. So what actually shifts the timeline? Not effort, but resonant shift. Resonant shift means interrupting the old signal with such a clear, coherent, precise frequency that the entire field pattern reorganizes around it. This doesn't come from more willpower. It comes from exiting the frequency loop of your current identity pattern. That exit doesn't require years. It requires access. To what? A different emotional field, a different nervous system tone, a different perceptual lens. Let's ground this. You're locked in a timeline loop. You're not making the progress you want. You decide to double down. So you start working on 10 new habits. You wake up earlier. You try gratitude journaling. You restrict dopamine. You write out your goals 10 times a day. But here's the kicker. If you do all of that from the same energetic identity state, the one that believes it's not enough, not yet there, still broken, still lacking, then all of those efforts become fuel for the existing timeline. You become more attached to the outcome. You contract your nervous system around the desire. You magnify the signal of separation. And what happens? You collapse into the same self again. So how do you exit that trap? You apply the principle of signal override. Not by adding effort, but by withdrawing energy from the misaligned field. You begin to interrupt the feedback loop by removing your habitual attention from it. This is not ignoring your problems. This is understanding that problems are just collapsed versions of attention density. So you withdraw the attention. You interrupt the inner narrative. You change the somatic signature. And once the field starts to lose coherence, a new possibility can emerge. This is called decoherence in quantum theory. When the system loses its stabilized frequency, it opens to a broader range of outcomes. This is the opportunity for true change. But that opportunity doesn't exist if you're still reinforcing the old system with pressure. Let's take it further. The universe doesn't reward effort. It rewards alignment. Alignment isn't about knowing what you want and pushing toward it. Alignment is when the signal you send, internally and externally, matches the structure of the outcome you claim to desire. And if it doesn't match, then effort becomes static. Noise, resistance. No amount of repetition overrides a mismatched frequency. Only resonance can. So the real skill here is not willpower. It's awareness without reactivity. When you stop reacting to the old timeline, stop trying to fix it, perfect it, control it, you begin to extract energy from the loop. That creates space. And space is the necessary condition for quantum shifts. Effort crowds the system. Awareness liberates it. So here's the core insight. The harder you try to change from within a misaligned field, the more you reinforce that field's authority over you. True movement begins when you stop energizing the loop and begin creating contrast. Contrast between who you've been and the signal you're choosing now. Contrast between the emotional tone of survival and the emotional tone of expansion. Contrast between needing change and already being the frequency that matches the desired reality. And that contrast, that clean, coherent shift in the signal, is what breaks the loop. Next, we will explore how the timeline of your future is not something you pursue. It's something that responds to your state. We're going to break open the illusion that choice is linear and instead reveal how you synchronize with potential futures through internal coherence. Let's strip it down to the core. You believe you're choosing your future through decisions, through goals, through conscious intention. But the truth is more subtle and far more powerful. You don't decide your future in the way you think. You resolve it. Out of an ocean of potential timelines, your future emerges not from logic, but from signal alignment. That means the future isn't ahead of you. It's entangled with your present field, and the quality of that field determines which future becomes real. Let's start with quantum superposition. In this principle, a system exists in multiple potential states simultaneously until observed. When observation occurs, the wave function collapses, and one outcome becomes real. This isn't metaphor. This is physics. Now apply that to identity. You aren't on a single linear path to one future. You exist inside a cloud of potential timelines. Timelines where you thrive. Timelines where you struggle. Timelines where you actualize your purpose. Timelines where you loop forever in confusion. All of those are valid. All of them already exist in the quantum field. The question isn't which one is destined. The question is, which one are you tuned to? Here's the paradox. The field doesn't reward the most reasonable outcome. It doesn't prioritize the most logical path. It resolves the timeline that best matches your current resonance. So if you carry shame, contraction, scarcity, or anxiety as your default signal, you collapse into futures that reinforce those states. Not because you want them, but because they harmonize with your current field. That's how probability resolution works. It's not preference. It's pattern coherence. Now let's talk about timeline attraction. Most people believe they can manifest a better future by thinking about it, visualizing it, writing it down repeatedly. But if the signal they're broadcasting is based in need, absence, fear, or lack, the field doesn't listen to their words. It listens to their core frequency. That frequency becomes the deciding factor. Your attention might want the future, but your signal is tuned to the past, and the field resolves the timeline accordingly. So how do you align with a higher timeline? You don't beg for it. You become a match to it. That means you elevate your emotional field to one that already contains the tone of the future outcome. You shift the language of your internal narration to reflect the structure of that outcome. You normalize behaviors not to reach the future, but because they already express it. The future doesn't happen to you, crystallizes through you, through every choice, every frequency, every thought form you entertain or interrupt. Let's clarify something crucial. You aren't trying to make the best future more likely. You're becoming the kind of observer that collapses that future into now. This requires high-resolution consciousness. It requires precision in how you manage your internal state. Not perfection, precision. This is where the observer effect matters most, because the state of the observer determines the version of the system that emerges. In your life, that means you aren't here to chase outcomes. You're here to become the type of observer that transforms the field simply by existing in it. That's alignment. That's quantum self-evolution. When you understand this, you no longer wait for signs. You no longer chase signals. You become one. A signal so clean, so coherent, that only matching timelines can stabilize around you. Next, we will reveal how you can start to tune your consciousness with this level of precision, and begin consistently shifting into new identity states that embody your highest potential. Every reality you could ever experience already exists, not as fantasy, not as metaphor, but as a real, viable configuration within the infinite spectrum of the quantum field. The version of you that's clear, decisive, grounded, visionary, successful, that version is not something you must become. It's something you can tune into. Just like tuning a radio, you don't create the music. You simply change the frequency to access what's already being broadcast. The same is true for identity. The future identity state you desire already exists as a broadcast within the field. And tuning into it isn't a poetic process. It's a technical one. It involves signal hygiene, emotional alignment, neurological pacing, and behavioral coherence. Let's get specific. Frequency matching is the principle that your internal energetic state determines what version of external reality becomes available to you. You don't get what you want. You get what you match. This is not abstract. Every emotion has a frequency. Every thought form has a resonance profile. Every belief has a vibrational tone. Your nervous system is an antenna. Your mind is a filtering device. And your body is a conductor of energetic pattern. When all three systems are synchronized, you match a coherent field. That match determines the identity state that becomes real. Here's where most people make a mistake. They attempt to think their way into a higher version of themselves. They visualize, repeat affirmations, or script ideal outcomes. But they never tune their emotional tone to match the frequency of the desired identity. They never adjust their nervous system to embody the felt sense of safety, power, creativity, or flow. They never recondition their behaviors to match the operating patterns of the version they claim to want. The result? The frequency doesn't change, and so the identity remains stuck. Let's look at this through the lens of radio signal logic. If you're tuned to 88.3 FM and you want to hear 101.5 FM, you can't just wish for the new station. You can't just believe in it. You have to turn the dial, and that dial is your state of being. Your frequency is not your thoughts. It's the combination of your baseline emotions, physical rhythms, attention patterns, and linguistic framing. These aren't vibes. These are data points that determine coherence. Let's talk coherence. Coherence is the alignment of your inner systems so that they reinforce a singular energetic broadcast. Most people are incoherent. They want success, but feel undeserving. They imagine abundance, but hold tension in their gut. They try to be confident, but speak in fragmented, hesitant language. That internal dissonance fractures the signal. And fractured signals don't match any elevated timeline. They loop back into the familiar identity. So the work is not to pretend. The work is to align. To align means your thoughts reinforce your emotions. Your emotions stabilize your nervous system. Your body language reflects your beliefs. And your behaviors mirror the structure of your chosen timeline. This creates a full-spectrum broadcast. That's when frequency matching becomes real. Let's take this further. The identity state you desire isn't just an outcome. It's a signal structure that includes the emotional field you hold, the decisions you normalize, the information you prioritize, the perceptions you sustain, the environments you magnetize, the pace of your daily behaviors. Each of these layers carries a signature. Change one and the others begin to wobble. Shift multiple and the entire field reorganizes. So if you want to access the version of you that already lives in your desired reality, you need to stabilize that identity signal in real time. And here's how. Step 1. Emotional elevation. The identity you desire is rooted in a different emotional baseline. You must begin to create micro-experiences that train your body to feel that state now, not later. This means nervous system calibration, breath regulation, micro-moments of joy, presence, power, and clarity. You install these into your day like frequency anchors. Step 2. Behavioral resonance. Your desired identity makes different micro-choices. It answers emails differently. It speaks to people differently. It organizes space differently. It makes decisions with a different rhythm and tone. You don't wait to become this version. You rehearse the behaviors now. That creates behavioral entrainment. Step 3. Linguistic integrity. You must speak the language of the timeline you're syncing to, not just in public. Internally, privately, you must remove phrases that reinforce lack, delay, confusion, or dependency, and instead, install language that reflects decisiveness, alignment, clarity, and sufficiency. Language encodes the field. Every phrase you use is a tuning device. Choose them wisely. Now here's the subtle key. The goal isn't to fake it. The goal is to inhabit the new signal with microcoherence. You're not forcing transformation. You're practicing a new broadcast. And that broadcast becomes stronger with repetition, feedback, embodiment, and awareness. Eventually, the field accepts this as your new base frequency. And when that happens, the old identity dissolves. The new one becomes stable. the reality around you begins to reorganize accordingly. This is not law of attraction. This is law of resonance. Nothing outside of you is deciding. The field doesn't have preferences. It just matches patterns. You don't get what you visualize. You get what you consistently are at the frequency level. You are the tuner. You are the signal. You are the collapse point for your chosen timeline. Next, we will examine why so many people fail despite intense visualization efforts, and how the physics of phase alignment holds the key to consistency. Visualization, one of the most widely taught tools in modern self-development. You've been told that if you can see it clearly, you can create it. That if you mentally rehearse a desired outcome with enough detail, it will materialize. And yet, for most people, it doesn't. At least not consistently. At least not sustainably. Why? Because visualization without alignment is like tuning a radio to a station that doesn't exist in your region. You might catch a flicker, a brief signal, a flash of clarity. But the moment you release the focus, the signal collapses. This isn't a failure of imagination. It's a failure of phase alignment. Let's explain. In physics, phase alignment refers to the synchronization of wave patterns so that their crests and troughs reinforce each other. When waves are in phase, they amplify. When they're out of phase, they cancel each other out. This principle applies directly to the practice of visualization. If your mental imagery is broadcasting one signal, but your emotional body is broadcasting another, and your nervous system is contracted, skeptical, or resistant, then the signals are out of phase. They interfere with each other. The result? Incoherence. No amplification. No manifestation. This is why your visions don't land. It's not about how vivid they are. It's about whether or not they're harmonized across your system. Let's break it down. You visualize success. You imagine wealth. You script a future of freedom and expansion. But underneath the imagery, your emotional body is radiating doubt. Your nervous system is tight. Your breathing is shallow. You feel rushed, impatient, or desperate. That emotional frequency overrides the mental picture. The field resolves what's coherent. And the most dominant coherence in this case is not the vision. It's the emotional contraction underneath it. The universe doesn't respond to your images. It responds to your signal integrity. Now reverse it. When you visualize with emotional congruence. When your body begins to feel safe in the image. When your heart rate slows, your breath deepens, and your nervous system shifts into parasympathetic alignment. Then the field receives a stable, coherent frequency. That's when visualization becomes a tuning device, not just a mental projection. And that's when new realities begin to stabilize. So how do you fix the visualization problem? Step 1. Elevate your somatic field before visualizing. Don't visualize in a stressed state. Don't rush it. Begin with breath regulation. Activate safety, calm presence. Let your body feel like the future is already safe, not just possible. Step 2. Use multisensory coherence. Don't just picture the outcome. Feel it. Smell it. Hear the cadence of your voice in that new timeline. Sense the emotional texture of how that version of you moves through the world. Make it a whole system experience. Step 3. Limit repetition. Yes, limit it. Repetition without emotional freshness leads to numbness. Don't deaden the image through overexposure. Instead, visualize with intention, with high resolution, and then let go. Signal it. Lock it in. Release it. And let the field respond to the resonance, not the obsession. Step 4. Remove countersignals in daily life. If you visualize abundance but speak scarcity all day, you're interfering with your own signal. If you visualize success but behave in ways that betray your worth, the field reads the behavior, not the fantasy. Your entire life must begin to broadcast the reality you're signaling in vision. That's alignment. That's phase integrity. That's when visualization becomes effective, not as a wish, but as a field calibration device. Visualization is not magic. It's signal engineering. You're not asking for something. You're harmonizing with it. And that harmony is what collapses potential into form. Next, we will explore how your mind is not the source of reality, but a translator of deeper fields, and why understanding this distinction will redefine how you approach consciousness and self-evolution. You've been taught that your brain is the control center, that it's the generator of thought, the source of perception, the pilot of your identity. But that idea is obsolete. Modern neuroscience, quantum biology, and systems theory are converging on something far more disruptive and liberating. Your brain is not the source. It's a translator. You are not simply a mind inside a machine. You are consciousness interacting with probabilistic fields through a biological interface. The real signal isn't inside your skull. It's in the field around you, and your brain, nervous system, and perception apparatus act as decoding instruments for that signal. Let's get precise. What you perceive as reality is not objective. It's a rendering, a filtered, compressed, real-time hallucination that your brain constructs by interpreting electrical, chemical, and quantum scale signals. The visual world? Only a fraction of what exists in the electromagnetic spectrum. The sounds you hear? Filtered to fit your species-specific frequency tolerance. The thoughts you think? Shaped by previous experiences, cultural conditioning, subconscious patterning. And most importantly, your energetic resonance. This means you don't see the world as it is. You see the world as your interface permits you to decode it. Now consider the implications. If your brain is not generating your reality, but translating deeper informational fields, then the key to transformation isn't found in rewiring neurons alone. It's found in changing the input signal to which your interface is tuned. This flips the whole game. You stop trying to fix your thoughts. You stop endlessly rehashing traumas. You stop micromanaging your habits like they're destiny. Instead, you start managing signal quality. Because the higher the signal precision, the more your interface begins to decode from expanded timelines, not the looped feedback of your historical identity. Let's bring in quantum theory. In quantum systems, observation affects outcomes. Not because the observer has magical powers, but because the act of observation collapses probability into one measurable result. You, as consciousness, are not a passive witness. You are an observer participant. Your focus directs the collapse of potential outcomes into actual experiences. Your attention is not neutral, carries the weight of coherence. And that coherence determines what your interface decodes from the sea of probabilities. Think of your brain as an algorithm. Its job is to stabilize identity states. It filters out the billions of signals you could be decoding and reinforces the ones that keep you consistent with your prior configuration. This is efficient but limiting, because your brain doesn't ask, "What's possible?" It asks, "What's familiar?" Unless you override the pattern, unless you feed it new resonance, unless you train it to allow unfamiliar frequency into its decoding process. That's the doorway into new timelines. This is where we introduce the concept of field-sourced cognition. Field-sourced cognition is the understanding that your thoughts are not purely generated from inside your head. They are emergent properties of interaction between your nervous system and the quantum field. The field carries signal structures. These include archetypal ideas, potential decisions, novel insights, timelines, and energetic imprints. When you shift your internal resonance, you tune your interface to pick up different clusters of these signals. That's why inspired ideas come out of nowhere. That's why sudden clarity emerges after weeks of confusion. When nothing external has changed, you didn't solve the problem. You changed the signal, and your brain translated a new field. So what does this mean for self-improvement? It means your goal is not to rewire your brain in isolation. Your goal is to evolve the field conditions that feed it. You focus on coherence. You focus on energy management. You focus on emotional stability, clarity of intent, and the creation of internal spaciousness. These are not abstract goals. They're techniques for cleaning up your interface. A clean interface means higher fidelity decoding, which means greater access to future-based cognition, aligned choices, and novel behavioral scripts. Here's the paradox. When you try to change yourself using only mental effort, you stay locked in the very interface limitations you're trying to escape. When you expand your signal through emotion, breath, movement, clarity, coherence, you invite new signals into your mind. This is the real meaning of downloaded insights. You are not inventing them. You are accessing them through alignment. Let's take this deeper. You've heard the phrase, "You are not your thoughts." That's true but incomplete. You are the field from which thoughts are pulled. The thoughts you get are a function of the resonance you emit. That resonance attracts matching informational structures from the quantum field. And your interface, your brain, nervous system, and perceptual grid, translates those into conscious cognition. You are not the thinker. You are the tuner. And the quality of the signal you receive depends on the fidelity of your inner environment. This is why nervous system regulation, somatic clarity, and emotional integrity are so vital. They aren't just nice to have. They are the calibration tools of your entire decoding system. Your brain is not broken. It's not unmotivated. It's not lazy. It's just translating the field you've taught it to expect. When you shift that expectation, not with fantasy, but with precise emotional frequency, you change the stream of reality your brain is allowed to interpret. The result? New behaviors emerge automatically. New decisions feel natural. New levels of clarity and purpose become accessible. Because you've stopped trying to control the interface and started curating the field. Next, we will reveal why traditional goal setting can sabotage your evolution, and how a vector-based model provides nonlinear access to your highest alignment. Everyone talks about setting goals. Write them down. Break them into steps. Hold yourself accountable. But what if this entire model, this obsession with linear targets, is actually keeping you out of alignment? The reason traditional goal setting fails for so many people isn't lack of motivation. It's that it conflicts with how nonlinear systems, like consciousness, actually evolve. Let's be clear. Goal setting is Newtonian. It assumes life is like a billiard table. Clear paths, direct impacts, predictable outcomes. But your identity, your evolution, your timeline shifts, they're not billiard balls. They're complex, multidimensional, interdependent wave patterns. And in wave pattern logic, direction is more powerful than destination. This is where vector-based self-alignment comes in. A vector is not a fixed point. It's a direction in space defined by magnitude and orientation. In personal evolution, a vector is your signal trajectory, the direction your energy, attention, and behavior are currently aimed. Not what you want, not what you wrote in a journal, but the actual path your state is reinforcing. Your vector determines your timeline, not your goals. Let's make this real. You might set a goal to earn more money, launch a business, or become healthier. But what is the emotional tone behind that goal? Is it coming from desperation, fear, pressure to prove something, frantic need to escape a current state? That emotional quality defines the vector of the signal. And if your vector points toward contraction, even while your goal points toward expansion, you will collapse into realities that match the vector, not the vision. That's why you keep looping, why your goals stay written but unrealized. You've been tracking points, but the field responds to paths. Here's the kicker. When you correct your vector, the goals either become irrelevant or they become inevitable. Because now, you're not trying to force progress, you're riding a coherent trajectory. And that trajectory generates natural feedback loops, increased clarity, aligned opportunities, unexpected acceleration. Not because you hustled harder, but because you stopped splitting your energy between fantasy and contraction. So how do you use this? You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What is the direction of my current state?" Direction is emotional. Direction is energetic. Direction is attitudinal. Every thought you allow, every pattern you reinforce, every micro-decision you normalize, these encode the vector. Let's say you want to build deep relationships. What's your daily vector? Avoidance? Hyper-independence? Passive communication? Then the goal contradicts the signal. The vector leads elsewhere, no matter what the intention says. Now flip it. You begin showing up with openness. You communicate more directly. You respond with presence. Suddenly, relationships deepen, even without specific goals. Because the vector has corrected itself. The field resolves new outcomes automatically when the direction is aligned. Vector-based evolution is more precise, more adaptive, and more honest than goal fixation. Because goals can be fantasy, vectors reveal the actual path of your signal in real time. And when you become conscious of your vector, you gain access to moment-to-moment course correction. You stop asking, "Am I there yet?" and instead ask, "Is this thought, emotion, or action vectoring toward expansion or contraction?" That question creates clarity faster than any checklist ever could. Now let's get practical. 3 tools to track and correct your vector. First, emotional diagnostics. Every emotion is a vector signal. Joy, calm, curiosity equals expansion. Tension, guilt, shame equals contraction. Track your baseline, not what you say you want, but what your nervous system is consistently broadcasting. Second, microalignment feedback. After every decision or interaction, ask, did this action signal the timeline I'm choosing to stabilize? This trains coherence. Third, identity resonance. Every behavior signals a version of you. Stop asking what gets the result. Start asking, which self did this decision reinforce? That's vector-based thinking, and it collapses timelines faster than goal obsession ever could. Next, we will reveal how your sense of self might be running on outdated feedback loops, and how to refresh your identity field so it stops looping past versions and starts stabilizing the new. You think you're making choices in the present, but in most cases, your present is simply the aftershock of unprocessed timelines. You're not acting from clarity. You're reacting from compression. This is the invisible trap. You believe your current identity is accurate because it feels familiar. But that familiarity is often just a residue of old collapsed waveforms, traumas, conclusions, interpretations that you've mistaken for truth. What you're really navigating is a stale version of yourself. And stale identities are dangerous, not because they're bad, but because they feel real, while secretly filtering out every alternative possibility. Let's break it down. Every time you experience an event, especially one charged with emotion, your nervous system encodes not just the facts, but a frequency. That frequency becomes part of your operating field. If left unexamined, it becomes a closed loop. And that loop forms the resonance structure for future perception. So now, even when new possibilities appear, they get interpreted through the stale frequency of that past event. The result? You feel like you're evolving, but your signal keeps orbiting the same identity point. You've confused movement with transformation. This isn't abstract. You had a failure in your career. Your nervous system encoded it as risk is unsafe. Your emotional field wrapped it in shame. And your thoughts began looping protective scripts. Even after you move on, the frequency persists. Now, every time you consider a new venture, you experience hesitation, confusion, subtle contraction. You think it's intuition, but it's just a stale field. It's not your true self resisting. It's your stale identity filtering. This is called collapse conditioning. Collapse conditioning happens when the field of potential gets locked into a narrow band of frequency after a past event. You stop exploring. You stop feeling. You stop reaching. Not because you've changed, but because your field is stuck in a previously collapsed outcome. That version of you is outdated. But unless you disrupt it with a fresh signal, it keeps broadcasting. And it keeps reinforcing timelines that match the past, not the present. Here's where quantum theory provides clarity. A quantum system doesn't decide on a single outcome unless the environment forces it to collapse. Collapse only happens when observation and interference make other possibilities non-viable. In the same way, your consciousness collapses into identity patterns based on the dominant environment inside you. That includes memory, belief, emotion, and attention. Your current version of self is not the full truth. It's just the most stable collapse point inside your habitual system. And it can be changed not by rewriting the past, but by altering the signal now. Enter the process of quantum self-refresh. This isn't about healing in the traditional sense. It's not about finding the wound and spending years there. It's about introducing a field disruptor, an unexpected shift in perception, attention, or behavior that destabilizes the stale identity and opens the field back up. Let's break this into 3 practical shifts. 1. Interrupt the familiarity loop. You must introduce pattern violations in your daily experience. These can be micro shifts, taking a different route, using new language, changing your response to recurring emotional triggers. These shifts confuse the stale system. Confusion creates openness. Openness allows new data to enter. 2. Refresh your emotional resonance. The nervous system needs new signals of safety and capacity. You don't wait until you're ready. You create emotional conditions that signal, I am now operating from a new field. Use music, movement, visualization, breath. Elevate the emotional tone until your body can no longer maintain the posture of the old identity. That's when the loop breaks. 3. Reassign meaning. Stale identities persist because you keep reinforcing the same meaning. You interpret events through a fixed lens. You must disrupt that. Ask, what else could this mean? What version of me is interpreting it this way? Which version of me benefits from keeping this loop alive? These questions inject fluidity into the narrative. And fluidity is the enemy of collapse. Once the stale identity begins to dissolve, you'll feel disoriented. That's good. Disorientation is not regression. It's recalibration. You're no longer getting feedback from the old field. That emptiness is not a void. It signals silence before the new identity stabilizes. Let it be silent. Let it settle. And during that silence, feed your system with resonance. High-frequency thought. Behavior consistent with your chosen self. Environments that support the new state. You're not becoming anything. You're allowing your system to refresh its translation of the field. This is how quantum identity works. Not through time, but through signal revision. Next, we will explore an unusual connection between altered states and high performance, and why UFOs, psychedelics, and habit loops may share a surprising common thread. It sounds like an unlikely trio: UFOs, psychedelics, high-performance systems. But beneath the surface, they all tap into the same phenomenon: radical disruption of stabilized perceptual patterns. And that disruption opens up bandwidth in the system, allowing access to new timelines, behaviors, and cognitive structures. Let's be clear. This is not about chasing extreme states. It's about understanding that altered reality, whether through spontaneous anomalies or intentional practices, creates temporary conditions where the old identity cannot maintain control. And in that space, reconfiguration becomes possible. Let's start with altered states. Whether triggered by neurochemical catalysts, meditative flow, breathwork, or external anomalies, altered states remove the brain's default filtering system. This system, called the default mode network, is responsible for creating the illusion of a stable self. But that illusion is constructed. It's based on memory compression, prediction loops, and social conformity. When the system goes offline, even momentarily, consciousness stops collapsing into the same patterns. And when that happens, new thoughts emerge. New sensations appear. New archetypes surface. Suddenly, you're not you. You're an observer with access to possibilities that the habitual self has been suppressing. This is not a metaphysical idea. It's a neurological fact. And high-performance individuals have often, intentionally or not, hacked into this mechanism. They do it through extreme focus, sensory immersion, movement, and micro-rituals that strip away the analytical mind. This is not about discipline. It's about suspending the default signal long enough to access new input. Because when you suppress pattern repetition, the field opens. Now enter the anomaly effect. UFO encounters, precognitive dreams, time dilation experiences. These events may seem fantastical, but what they all have in common is disruption of local reality logic. The person can no longer trust that their previous map of what is accurate. Their system enters a state of suspension. They are forced to re-examine all assumptions. And that act of collapsing certainty creates cognitive and emotional instability. But in that instability, the field becomes editable. It's like softening wet clay. This isn't about the event itself. It's about what happens to the internal structure of the observer. The shock destabilizes the identity, and in that opening, something new can root. The same applies at a more micro level to habits. Habits are not just routines. They're identity stabilizers. You wake up at the same time. You say the same things. You interact with the world using pre-decided scripts. This builds predictability, but it also builds walls. So when you disrupt even a small habit, like changing how you enter a room, how you greet someone, how you respond to conflict, you create micro-anomalies. And those micro-anomalies ripple. They send a signal to the system. Something has shifted. Recalibration required. Now, the brain becomes more plastic. The nervous system becomes more alert. And the field becomes more accessible. So whether it's a high-performance ritual, a psychedelic journey, or a so-called UFO contact, the deeper mechanism is the same: disruption of the dominant pattern. And that disruption creates the opportunity for signal replacement. That's the key. You don't just remove a habit, or enter an altered state, or experience the unknown. You use that window to install a higher frequency signal. Because disruption without replacement leads to chaos. But disruption paired with intentional resonance leads to transformation. Let's make this practical. You don't need to wait for aliens or psychedelics. You can create deliberate pattern interventions. Interrupt your schedule at a random point. Do something unplanned. Change your rhythm of speech mid-conversation. Observe. Pause before reacting to a common trigger and insert a totally unexpected behavior. Each of these actions confuses the identity loop. Each sends a signal. We're no longer running the old code. And confusion leads to openness. Openness is your window. That's where you inject the new frequency. You speak a truth that the old you would never voice. You adopt a posture of power that your past would resist. You entertain a possibility that used to feel impossible. This is not performance. It's recoding. Disruption is not the goal. It's the clearing mechanism. It wipes the slate long enough for you to choose again. And what you install during that clearing, that becomes the new attractor, the new resonance, the new timeline. Next, we will explore how even the tiniest shifts in your identity trajectory, what we call drift velocity, can trigger exponential transformation across the timelines you have access to. You've been trained to believe in breakthrough moments, massive decisions, bold changes, big leaps. But in quantum systems, power often lies not in magnitude, but in precision, not in how hard you act, but in where and how subtly you shift. This is the unspoken mechanism behind what many call quantum leaps. Not a giant jump forward, but a sequence of micro-adjustments in your identity trajectory. These are so small they seem invisible, yet their impact is exponential. Because in a multidimensional field, even a slight change in angle alters your entire trajectory across time. Let's define this clearly. Identity drift is the idea that you're always in motion. Every thought, every reaction, every emotional tone moves your identity either toward expansion or toward contraction. You never stand still. There's always drift. The question is, are you drifting by default or by design? Now apply this to the quantum field. Timelines are not like straight paths on a map. They're stacked possibilities, entangled, overlapping, coexisting. Each version of you lives on a slightly different energetic frequency. And the difference between them is not always dramatic. Sometimes, the only thing separating a high-performance timeline from a looping one is 1 degree of drift. That 1 degree, sustained over time, becomes a total divergence. Here's how that plays out. Let's say you experience a moment of insecurity. You shrink slightly. You say less in the meeting. You make a safe choice. You silence your intuitive response. That one moment becomes a pattern. A pattern becomes a tone. And the tone becomes your new baseline. No explosion. No breakdown. Just drift. You didn't make a dramatic decision. You allowed a subtle collapse in your frequency. And now, your trajectory points to a different future entirely. The inverse is also true. You take a breath. You ground yourself. You say the thing despite the fear. You make the choice that feels expensive, not safe. And the shift? Microscopic. But the vector is now corrected. The field reads the new signal. Timelines realign accordingly. This is the true nature of exponential transformation. Tiny shifts accurately applied at the level of identity frequency. Let's translate this into structure. Identity drift velocity is the rate and direction at which your current frequency is shifting. If you're unconscious of it, the drift will follow the gravitational pull of your default wiring, old stories, emotions, behaviors. If you're conscious of it, you can begin vector calibration, small, intentional changes in emotional tone, language, posture, and focus that reorient your field. This is not about force. It's about micro-alignment. Here's how it works. Step 1. Track your tone. Your emotional tone is the clearest indicator of drift. Are you moving toward contraction, tension, hesitation, anxiety, or toward coherence, presence, clarity, groundedness? Don't overanalyze. Just notice. Step 2. Intervene early. The earlier you catch the drift, the easier it is to correct. A deep breath, a shift in physical stance, a reframing of the thought. These are micro-corrections, but they change the signal. Step 3. Reinforce the new angle. The system seeks stability. So once you shift, reinforce. Repeat the aligned behavior. Speak from the new tone. Make the next 3 actions match the corrected frequency. This locks in the new drift trajectory. Think of yourself as a spacecraft. If you change your angle by just 1 degree when you're close to Earth, that change might seem insignificant. But a few million miles later, that 1 degree shift puts you in an entirely different solar system. That's identity drift velocity. It's not about being perfect. It's about maintaining awareness of the trajectory. That awareness is your power. It lets you pivot, refine, and correct in real time. It keeps you from building momentum around unconscious collapse. It helps you build momentum around micro-aligned action. Let's take it deeper. Every version of you, each identity configuration, has a unique behavioral signature. How you sit, how you respond to stimuli, how you speak when you're interrupted, how you pace your day. All of these micro-behaviors reinforce a particular signal. If you shift any of them, even slightly, you begin to create identity divergence. You're no longer being who you were 5 minutes ago. You're stabilizing a new resonance, and the field starts to respond in kind. This isn't metaphor. This is mechanics. Every action, thought, and emotion is a form of self-reinforcing feedback. When left unexamined, it feeds the default. When interrupted and redirected, it feeds the emergent. So you don't need to chase big changes. You need to track tiny patterns, because that's where timelines split. This is the skill to develop, microfrequency awareness. It's not enough to know how you feel once a day. You must begin to notice your drift moment to moment. Is this action aligned with who I'm becoming? Is this posture reflecting the signal I want stabilized? Is this thought reinforcing expansion or entrenching contraction? You answer with your behavior, every time, not with theory, with tone, with decision, with precision. The path to a radically different future is not paved with dramatic changes. It's paved with small, clean shifts, repeated with integrity. This is what creates compound resonance. This is what moves you from noise to signal. This is how you leave behind timelines that no longer serve your evolution. Next, we will unpack the hidden feedback loop that reality uses to mirror your internal state, and how to consciously modulate that signal to reinforce your chosen identity. You've been taught to treat transformation like a mountain to climb, something you earn, something you reach, something that lies out there in the future, always slightly out of range. But here's the twist that unravels the entire narrative. You're not here to become something. You're here to remember what you already are. The highest version of you is not a fantasy. It's not potential. It's a frequency configuration that already exists, fully formed, encoded into the fabric of the quantum field. Your real task is not to invent that version. It's to match its signal with enough clarity, consistency, and coherence that it stabilizes as your lived identity. Let's strip this down. At the quantum level, everything exists as a field of possibility. You are entangled with infinite versions of yourself. Some chaotic, some contracted, some wildly evolved. These versions are not theoretical. They are stored configurations of information, emotion, behavior, and resonance, just waiting for you to tune into them. When you experience moments of clarity, glimpses of power, bursts of synchronicity, that's not luck. That's resonance recall. Your system briefly aligns with the version of you that's already whole, already capable, already clear. But because it's unfamiliar, you wobble. The signal fades. You fall back into the practiced pattern of becoming. Becoming is seductive, keeps you busy. It gives your mind something to fix. It makes you feel productive. But it also keeps you separate from the truth. The truth is this. There is a version of you already encoded in the field that is living your highest alignment. It doesn't need to be found. It needs to be remembered. That version of you speaks differently, moves differently, makes decisions from a different baseline. It holds a different emotional charge. It breathes at a different rhythm. It responds to conflict, doubt, and opportunity from a fundamentally different internal geometry. Your job is to learn how to access that frequency on command, not through force, not through fantasy, but through precision frequency recall. Let's make this practical. The self you desire to embody already exists, but your daily behaviors, emotional habits, and identity reflexes are often tuned to an older version. So the work isn't to build a new self from scratch. It's to withdraw energy from the misaligned version until it fades from signal strength and reallocate energy into the remembered configuration. That remembered self already has a blueprint. You've touched it before, in flow, in alignment, in truth. Even if briefly, those glimpses weren't flukes. They were data points, markers, coordinates on the quantum map. You don't chase them, you stabilize them. Here's how. Step 1. Isolate the signal. Ask yourself, when have I felt most like the version of me I admire? What did I feel in my body? How did I think, move, speak? What decisions came naturally? You're not asking for stories. You're looking for frequency signatures. How did that version of you feel from the inside? This becomes your signal profile. Step 2. Interrupt the false self. The current you, the one looping, doubting, trying, is not wrong, but it's misaligned. It's trying to solve a problem that doesn't exist. How to become something you already are. So when you notice the loop, hesitation, self-criticism, over-efforting, don't fix it. Interrupt it. Ask, who does this version of me serve? What field am I feeding right now? Is this action stabilizing the self I remember, or the one I've outgrown? Then pause. Withdraw the energy. Starve the loop. Step 3. Inject the remembered frequency. This is where most people fail. They stop at awareness. But awareness without injection is passive. You must bring in the signal of your remembered self. Now, not just mentally, somatically, vocally, energetically. You breathe like them. You speak from their posture. You decide with their rhythm. You treat the moment as if you are them now, because that's what creates signal stabilization. And once the signal stabilizes, the feedback loop locks in. Reality begins to reflect the new identity. The self becomes real, not because it's new, because it's finally coherent. Let's go deeper. Most people oscillate between old and new selves. They remember for a moment, then doubt, then try harder, then collapse, then repeat. That oscillation creates energetic noise, keeps the signal weak. The feedback from reality stays inconsistent, and the self never stabilizes. To break the oscillation, you must commit to resonance, not results. This means, you don't ask, is it working? You ask, am I in frequency? You trust the broadcast before the world reflects it. You live the signal before the timeline confirms it. That's not faith. That's field literacy. You understand how reality actually works, not reactively, but structurally. Let's install this even deeper. You are not an isolated being. You are a node of consciousness, interacting with a vast field of entangled probabilities. Everything you think, feel, and choose either strengthens or weakens your connection to a specific version of self. The more coherent your signal, the more stable the identity. The more stable the identity, the more reality responds with matching clarity. This creates a feedback loop. And that loop is what creates transformation, not by effort, but by signal recall. You recall the version of you that already exists. You amplify it. You practice it. You normalize it. You become it not through striving, but through repetition of alignment. Here's the final key. You're not trying to evolve. You're learning how to stop interfering with your own signal. That's it. The you that is whole, wise, powerful, purposeful, it's not out of reach. It's simply underinterpreted. It's there in the field, right now, waiting for precision, waiting for consistency, waiting for your broadcast to stop glitching and start streaming clearly. When that happens, you'll notice something strange. You stop reacting. You stop chasing. You stop performing. You start remembering. And what you remember feels like peace. Feels like clarity, feels like inevitability, not because life got easier, but because you stopped resisting your own resonance. This is the final evolution of self-improvement. No more becoming, no more chasing, no more fixing, only matching, only remembering, only stabilizing the self you were encoded to express. Before the noise, the stories, the loops, you were never incomplete. You were just tuned incorrectly. Now you know how to correct the signal. Now you know how to live from the frequency that collapses timelines, stabilizes identity, and generates coherent reality. The journey was never outward. It was always inward, into the field, into the resonance, into the version of you that was always waiting to be remembered. Thank you for taking this journey into quantum self-evolution. Now go match the signal, because that's where your real power lives.